Well, hi, Vaughn. Here we are
Harold?
a week later again, and we seem to finally have a government. What's
Yes.
the situation in Victoria?
Yeah, it's very close. We used to talk about the election in 2017 where the government lost its majority by 189 votes in one riding. That's looking like a landslide compared to what happened here. The New Democrats won a majority of seats in the legislature by one seat. And in that seat, their margin is 27 votes. And that's a small enough margin that it's going to recount by a judge next week. The judges, BC Supreme Court judge, will handle the recount there. And in one riding in Kelowna, held by the Conservatives, November the 7th and 8th. So the government has won. David Eby was premier and he's still premier, but he's keeping his government in caretaker mode until the judicial recounts are completed. Then he will appoint a new cabinet. He's got a lot of vacancies. We think the reason he's holding off is because that seat in Surrey, where Gary Begg reversed the Conservatives were ahead on election night, and on the recount, the first recount, Begg reversed it. They think Begg's a two-term New Democrat. They're very happy with him winning. They're calling him landslide Begg, and I think the premier wants to put him in cabinet, and you don't want to put him in cabinet, and just in case the count reverses. So I think that's why we're in caretaker mode until they say when the judges finish counting on the 8th, they will appoint a cabinet very quickly after that. And Harold, is going to be a very new cabinet. 7 New Democrats retired at the election, cabinet ministers, and another 5 were defeated. So they're still ministers until we get a new cabinet, but that's 12 vacancies and some very big and important posts. So it's going to be a very different government when we get it.
Gary Begg, former RCMP officer,
Yes.
Is that right?
Yep,
okay,
that's right.
So
yeah,
where might he fit in cabinet if that is indeed the
well, the lineup, forestry is vacant, finance is vacant, environment is vacant, education is going to be vacant. I shouldn't say vacant. Those ministers will be out because they're not members of the legislature anymore. Right. I don't know about Begg, but again, Harold, this government has really got to rebuild its relationship with Surrey.
Yes.
Even with that reversal, the Conservatives hold more seats in Surrey than do the New Democrats. So it's interesting. You talk to New Democrats and what happened in Surrey? Now, they give you a list of things they did for Surrey. I promised them one hospital and a tower at the second one and a transit line and new schools and the Patello Bridge and all this. One of the New Democrats said, yeah, but most of that stuff you can't see, right? They had a groundbreaking ceremony for the new hospital. It's not built yet. The transit line, well, they're getting to work on it, but it's not there. And the feeling was that you've actually got to show Surrey some results on things. Last count I saw, 400 portables at schools, 8,000 kids in Surrey are attending portables, and they're talking about double-decker portables now. So they got a lot of work to do there. And I think with the retirement of senior ministers from Surrey, like Bruce Ralston and Harry Baines, and the defeat of the education minister, Rashna Singh, I think Begg will be critical to rebuilding the relationship with Surrey. So you probably get a ministry that, what are you doing from Surrey? Well, here I am to tell you what it is.
The other thing I guess the House is going to have to decide is the next speaker.
Yes.
So where are we with that?
Well, this is kind of an amusing sidelight, really. The New Democrats got a big break in 2017 when they got a disaffected BC Liberal, Darryl Plecas, agree to serve as speaker. So you don't have to make one of your own members speaker. And so they thought, well, maybe we can pull that off again. So they started. The speaker has got to be somebody who's been in the legislature. You know, people say, well, make one of the Greens. So the Greens are rookies. We had a speaker of the legislature when Mike Harper was premier, and it was Joan Sawicki, and she'd not ever served in the House before. And you don't want to do that. It wasn't fair to her, and it wasn't fair to the House. And they replaced her. They made her a cabinet minister and put somebody else in. So it's got to be somebody with experience. So there's what, a half dozen Conservatives who were in the last House as BC Liberal / BC United. So they started approaching them, and they floated the names around, right? So reporters heard, you know, maybe so-and-so, maybe so-and-so. Well, the Conservatives, of course, we interviewed them, and it wasn't very long before they started taking themselves out of the running. Most of them were respectful and polite, although one of them said no effing way. And anyway, they pretty much run out the list. So they're not going to get a Conservative. The Greens just doesn't add up. So now our expectation, Harold, is that the speaker in the coming legislature will be the person who was the speaker in the last legislature, Raj Chauhan, MLA from Burnaby. Several of the Conservatives, when they were asked about this, said, well, why don't they just reappoint Chauhan? He was fine. You know, you expect the speaker is going to vote with the government on key issues, but there are issues where the speaker's judgment is important and all that. And our expectation is the speaker's actually elected, but right, the government has the votes to elect the person, and usually nobody else runs against them, because why would you? So our expectation is that Raj Chauhan will be the speaker when the House sits. We don't have a date for the legislature sitting yet. The order we've been told to expect is recount, cabinet, and then a brief sitting of the legislature late November or early December. The main business will be to elect a speaker, get the other things that go with the legislature in place, get it organized. But we've been told, don't expect any legislation. The legislation, budget, throne speech, all of that will be coming in the new year. The date on the calendar right now is February. I don't know if people will wait that long. I wonder they may have to do it a little earlier.
Interesting. I was speaking to someone this week who was in a Gordon Campbell government that had a thin majority. It's nothing like what we're seeing in Victoria now. But they were lamenting how everybody had to stay in the building till 9 o'clock at night, because you never knew what sort of votes might come before the House, and that it was quite a grueling time. Is that what we're in store for this time as well?
That's interesting. You know, the Democrats had their first caucus meeting in Victoria this week, and there's a lot of orienteering that goes on for new MLAs. They have to be explained budget procedures and expense accounts and benefits and how the House works and all that, and conflict of interest and all that's going on. But you're right, Harold. One of the first things they were told was, look, with a 1-seat majority, there will be no leaves, period. When the House is sitting, everybody has to be here, at least in the legislature building, and they'll be assigned to be in the chamber. There'll be a roster. But the other thing is, you have to be close to the legislature chamber, because when there's a vote, they ring bells in the building, and you got to get in the chamber before they stop ringing the bells, because if you miss that, they lock the door on you. Now, it's a bit of relief. The old rule was the bells rang for 5 minutes. I'm told by a former MLA this morning, sent me a note. He said, they're going to have a 10-minute bell ringing. So you've got a little more time to get in there. But you see them coming down the hallway. And of course, we all remember a day in 1996, or the 1996, I think it was, 7 there anyway, in the 90s, where Glenn Clark was premier. and he only had a 3-vote majority, and the division bells are ringing, and the members are coming in, and at the last minute, we see Glenn Clark come tearing around the corner and running down the hallway, and then you hear the click as they lock the door, and he's stuck out in the hallway. And he said a bad word that I wouldn't repeat on this, and the whip. So the whip is critical in this. Every party has a whip, and the whip is in charge of attendance and telling people where they have to be and making sure they always have the votes to pass everything in the House. So government doesn't fall if it loses a vote, unless it's confidence or the budget. But it's embarrassing. It's a sign you can't manage the place. So the whip in those days was this fabulous character from Alberni, former jeweler and farmer named Gerard Jansen, and he punished Glenn Clark for missing a vote because he said it wouldn't be fair to punish all the other members and let the premier off the hook. So Glenn Clark was assigned to a week of night sittings in the legislature. He had to sit in the chamber and behave himself and be there. So we're headed into that era. It will be a management issue, and it'll be a management issue every time the House is sitting, that the government's got to have the votes in the place because they don't want to be embarrassed. They don't want it to look like, oh, gosh, you can't count.
And what happens if someone gets sick? Is there any parliamentary tradition that would, where the other side would leave someone out to account for someone who's seriously ill, that kind of thing?
So there is a parliamentary tradition that exists in some parliaments called pairing, and it's as you describe. Such and such a member is away on a trade mission or is ill, and the opposition agrees to pair with them. Somebody else will not be there for that. We used to have pairing in British Columbia. If you look back at the old records of the chamber, the pairs used to be listed in it, but it broke down. The polarization, the bitter polarization in BC politics, starting in the 1960s, they haven't been able to make pairing work. They don't trust each other on it. So you can get it informally, and you'll get understandings, but basically, no, we don't have that as a routine. And what the government does is they try to avoid votes when someone's away, or I think what you'll see is if they lose a vote while they're away, they will call it back and reverse the result, which you can do in parliamentary procedure as long as it's not the budget, as long as it's not explicitly a motion of non-confidence in the government. But those don't happen very often. So I think that's what they'll do. I don't see this side. Harold, we had whiffs this week of the bitterness lingering from the campaign. John Rustad said that David Eby habitually lied throughout the campaign, and that Rustad is not going to forget it, and that he's going to deal with it in the House. And David Eby said there are conservatives who got elected, and he's not prepared to forgive them for the awful, racist, appalling things they said. So they're not on a great footing with each other. And when you consider how close things are, they're going to have to put the history of the campaign behind them if it's going to work at all. But, maybe House doesn't sit to the new year. They'll have gotten over some of that.
Right. I'm sure John Rustad has some regrets, as any leader would, who came that close to forming government. Yeah. But I guess overall, he and the Conservatives must be thrilled with the number of seats they have. But what does their sort of analysis look like? What were the factors for them in this campaign?
Yeah, I mean, yes, there's much to celebrate. The Conservatives, haven't elected a person under the party name since 1978. They were nowhere 18 months ago. No money, no MLAs, no candidates. They pulled this off in record time, really. And all of that, yes, you celebrate it. But flip it around, there was a very large discontent with the record in BC, and they didn't win. They
Right.
came very close, but they didn't win. So Rustad was asked about, how do you explain your falling short? And he said, we ran out of time. The Conservatives' view is that, if Kevin Falcon and BC United had shut things down in May instead of August, there would have been more time to organize the Conservatives, to maybe merge their slate of candidates. You might have had, there were some very angry and upset members of BC United about the way the party was shut down at the last minute and its operations frozen. And some of those ran as independents. And there are 2 or 3 ridings in the province where those independents split the vote sufficiently to elect the New Democrats. So the Conservative analysis starts there and says, yeah, if we'd had more time and more advanced time, we might have formed government. And political parties do this, right? You'll hear from New Democrats. There are a dozen seats in the province where, if you assume that the Green vote and the NDP were combined, and that's a pretty big if, the NDP would have carried those seats and the Conservatives would be a lot farther behind. So again, you get analysis from the parties about what happened, but eventually they have to turn the page and say, what do we need to do to win the next one? And if the House is as precarious as it appears, the next one, David Eby's talking about governing for 4 years, but the next one could be a lot sooner than that.
Well, when the NDP still sat at 46 seats, of course, we heard a lot about the Greens and the 2 Greens and the balance of power. But even at 47 seats, what do you see the role of the Greens in this next legislative session?
So the government has been meeting with the Greens, with the 2 Green MLAs and their still leader, Sonia Furstenau, who didn't win her seat. And they're talking about areas they can work together. The Premier has already pointed out that the Greens had a worthy idea in their platform about reorganizing the healthcare system, reducing the bureaucracy and decentralizing it around community health centers. And Premier thinks that's worth a look. That'll take a while. I think probably those 2 parties are going to have to cooperate on climate action plans. So the government's promise is to get rid of the carbon tax if the federal government will allow it. Right now, national carbon tax law is, if a province hasn't got its own carbon tax, Ottawa will substitute its carbon tax. So you cut the provincial tax and Ottawa just comes back and imposes it. So they've got to work that out, and we don't know how that's going to work out. So I think they'll be working with them on environmental issues. There's a bunch of issues, though, on which they really don't agree. Perhaps those are issues on which the Conservatives and the New Democrats could agree. Rustad, as you know, election night or right afterwards said, well, we're going to bring down the government at the first opportunity. So he got asked about that this week. He had a news conference as well. And he said, he's hedging on that. He says, we will be a partner to the government where it is bringing in measures that will help people, especially to deal with the question of affordability. So we've taken that as a pretty strong hint that they will support, for example, the government's promise of $1,000 rebate. It's been called the grocery rebate, but it's $1,000. Middle-income families and everyone else, not everybody, but means tested, $1,000 to help you with cost of living. So I think the Conservatives are not going to vote against that. They're going to go for that. Rustad said that he would oppose the government on if they're doing stuff that he believes will damage the economy or damage people. But, you know, frankly, the government is not going to start off by bringing in a whole bunch of stuff that's going to be unpopular. One of the cabinet ministers has already joked that the only legislation you're going to see is going to be in favor of puppies and kittens, right? I mean, they know what one seat means. They don't want to. So the premier says he doesn't think people want an early election, and Rustad says he doesn't think people want an early election. So I think you'll see some maneuvering, but unless the government does something very reckless and really can't get the support of everybody in the House, I don't think we're into right up to the brink right away. The challenge will be managing. The other challenge is the problems facing the government are huge. Housing the premier's list and the opposition leaders' list are almost exactly the same. Housing affordability, access to health care and closures of ERs, public safety in the drug crisis, and just general affordability. Well, David Eby has been working on those since he became premier 2 years ago. We've had some progress, but clearly from the election result, people didn't think there'd been enough progress. And that's what we're looking at going forward too.
Wow. So I think everyone's hoping for the same thing, some progress on those fronts, whatever that looks like. So, all right. Thanks. Thanks again, Vaughn. Look forward to chatting again next week.
That'll be great, Harold. By then, we'll have the results of the recounts. We'll have perhaps right on the verge of getting a cabinet. And of course, Harold, we'll know what happened in the American election.
Oh, yes. I look forward to your thoughts on that one.
Edge of your seat things.
Yes. Hopefully we may know what's going on there by then. Thank you. Okay.
We'll know what's going on in the United States. We may not like it.
Yes.
Okay. Good to talk to you.